I'm making this video as I promised I would a couple of weeks ago. This is like attempt number 3 at trying to do this. Uh, before I get started, before I even get into this, I just want everybody to know this isn't intended to be a jab at anybody. Women that are watching this isn't a jab at you. Um, but I see what's happening in our society at large, particularly with these shady social movements that have been going on for the past 7 years in earnest. And I'm here to talk a little bit about it. I know that if I don't talk about these things, then nobody else is going to. I know that I can't count on anyone else to talk about these things. So therefore, I'm taking it into my own hands to do so. Millennial men that are watching this video, you're probably aware that the women our age for a while now have been caught up in a movement of sorts where they're hyperly focused on power. You've noticed that they've made some radical changes almost overnight. They've become far more masculine. They're not. They refuse to be stay-at-home moms, and they shame other women. They went from being proud stay-at-home moms to being ashamed of things like that just overnight almost. And I know a lot of you guys are noticing that. And I'm here to go into the details of why all that is what it is and how it's evolved over the past 7 or 8 years. What am I missing here? So I've been following this for, like I said, I noticed that it was a thing about 7 years ago. And I've been studying it very closely in the time since then, devoting a lot of time to this. I've been undercover in their private Facebook groups using a phony female Facebook account. And over the past 7 years, I've talked to hundreds of women about these things in great detail, and I've learned a lot. And a lot of the things that I'm going to be discussing in this presentation are things that they've personally told me over the years. And also, some of this stuff comes from different documents that I've uncovered over the past 7 years. Some of these are studies published by sociology departments. Some of them are United Nations training manuals on cultivating healthy masculinity and giving power to women and such. And I've shared a lot of these documents in the past. I'll be sharing more in the future. Um, Before I get started into this, I want to give you all a quick history lesson. Sorry, excuse me. In ancient Greece, there was a practice that slave owners used to implement on their slaves that they would freshly get in. As soon as they got in a new batch of people, they would seek out the leader of the group based on upon body language and other attributes, and they would hold that guy down and they would bash his head in front of everybody and get them traumatized. And then later they would pull the women off to the side and they would tell the women, look, it's up to you to get your men in line. And if you don't get your men in line, we're going to do this to every single one of you. And they would make the women work in the house, the master's home, where they taught them how to read and write. And the men they made work out in the barn and live out in the barn, and they didn't teach the men these things. And basically the women, because they could read and write, they were able to coordinate up under the noses of their men without the men ever knowing what was going on, and they were able to oppress them. And the women were reluctant to do this at first, but after a few generations they began to enjoy and take pleasure in oppressing their husbands and their men. And this strategy was put into writing in Greek, and these documents were later translated from Greek and other languages like English, where it became a practice in the U.S. Before slavery was abolished out here. I want everybody to keep this in mind because this little piece of history is going to kind of set the tone for a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. Now, 1 second while I grab a sip of water. Aquafina. They don't make another bottle of water like it, in my humble opinion. See, where are we? Okay, so moving on from our history lesson, now I want to get into what's going on in our society. A lot of people think they know, but they don't really know. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's Democrats and it's liberals." It is them, but it's not them calling the shots. It's damn sure not Joe Biden calling the shots. We all know that, Mister Brandon. Um, it's the United Nations, and they propose. Well, ultimately, it's not even them. It's people like George Soros and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. But the hub that they're pushing their agenda through is the United Nations, and the United Nations proposed a global agenda called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. They proposed this in September of 2015, and this agenda itself is a revamping of a previous agenda called Agenda 21, which was adopted in 1992. But Agenda 2030 is like on steroids, like the on steroids version of Agenda 21. And in Agenda 2030, they have 17 sustainable development goals that they're trying to reach by the year 2030. And I'm not really going to go over all these. They're on their website. But what you need to understand is all of these goals taken together, it amounts to a one world totalitarian government under the UN's jurisdiction. Uh, what they're calling for is they're calling for all of the world's agricultural and mineral resources to be under their dominion by the year 2030. They want mandatory vaccines. It's a really big issue right now. They want mandatory vaccinations. They want to regulate the amount of electricity you're allowed to use, the amount of water and food, and what type of food you're allowed to consume. They want to regulate how often you're allowed to drive a car, and a lot of this stuff's predicated on the idea that we need to fight climate change, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but one thing that they've integrated, well, actually, I'm getting a little too ahead of myself. I'm gonna pause on that note, and I'm pulling up the UN's website right here. What it says is that individual people, universities, governments, institutions, and organizations of all kinds are working separately on one or more of these goals at the same time. It also says that individual governments must translate the goals into national legislation, develop a plan of action, and establish their own budget. So, a lot of entities in America are working on realizing these goals and bringing them to fruition. And what you need to understand is 193 countries have signed on to this agenda out of a possible 195. Nobody voted for this, and yet we're actually paying for it, and it's radically transforming our country. Build Back Better is actually a UN coined term, and the agenda itself was developed by the UN and was proposed by them before the election last year. Something all of you guys need to look into because, again, I see you on Facebook making your post and you guys think you're so informed, but really you don't know jack shit. And I'm trying to tell you, you really need to pay attention to what I'm about to tell you in this video. Sorry, I didn't mean to insult you guys. Moving forward, I'm going to get into the dynamic between men and women, and this is one of the most overlooked things in our country right now. The United Nations is aware of this and they're exploiting this weakness, but in our society, we, especially men, we don't understand women's nature. Like, women understand our nature. Men, because of feminism and feminist activism over the course of the past 50 years, they've picked apart everything about men and every negative attribute that men have. They've held it under a microscope. And men in this country, on the other hand, they don't understand really much about women, or the older men don't. Younger men are starting to understand women better, but good Lord, my throat is dry. Very, very dry. But one thing that I want to put on you guys' radar is that women, they have a carnal desire about them. They desire power. They desire to take power, like, from people, from men, and they desire to control men. and especially the control thing is a carnal desire that they have, and all women have this innate carnal desire. It's whether or not they act upon it. Just as every man has the innate carnal desire to follow after his lust and be led by his sex drive. It's something that every man has a tendency for, and every woman has a tendency to want to control men. And that's something that a lot of men aren't aware of. And even if you tell them that, they'll disagree with you. And they'll be like, not all women. Yeah, I mean, it's an innate tendency. It's part of their biological wiring. They all have this. Doesn't mean they're all that way. It means that they all have the potential to be that way. And feminism really brings out, it really cultivates that dynamic about women. Women have also traditionally had what I like to call soft power. They've had certain attributes that men don't necessarily have. One of them is the power of persuasion and manipulation. And this isn't to put women down. Um, but they can be incredibly, remarkably manipulative. Most men cannot even fathom the level of manipulation that some women, a lot of women, are capable of. And the more I learn about it, the more it blows my mind. And they've also another key thing is they know how to like communicate under the radar, and they even speak a second language that most men are not able to perceive, and that most men just aren't even aware of. And it's pretty much a code language. And I'm going to get into that later in this video. And I know that sounds crazy if you've never been acquainted with that before, but a lot of those idle conversations that you hear women having that sound like a whole bunch of nothing really are a whole bunch of something. If you start paying attention, you'll learn some stuff. But with that said, there's perks that have traditionally come with being a man, and there's perks that have traditionally come with being a woman. The perks that traditionally come with being a woman is basic. They're treated as a special priority in terms of security, and men go out of their way to protect women more so than they do anybody else. It's just always been a thing. Women also enjoy men treating them or accommodating them while they're behaving as gentlemen, a man being a gentleman, in other words. And no need to really go into that. We know what that entails. Women are not expected to provide. Like there is now from their girlfriends, from their sisterhood, there's pressure to go out and not provide, but to work. But from a man's standpoint, no man really expects a woman to provide, and most men are, very happy, and it gives them a sense of purpose to be able to provide for their woman. They also get special opportunities just for simply being a woman. I mean, hell, we've all been to a party where women were let in for half price, but it's a lot deeper than that, and they get a lot of opportunities. They get given things just simply because of their gender. Like they get special treatment, like they come to work and there's a bunch of guys there, and especially if they look good, the guys will just bend over backwards trying to give them everything they want. They're also the regular recipients of male sacrifice in all of its forms, and that's a pretty exhaustive list there. The only perks that have ever come with being a man, or the only perk, shall I say, is the ability to call the shots in his own household, having the final say, being able to put his foot down and make the ground rules in the home. That's it, just the authority. And what feminism and the UN most recently are endeavoring to do is to give women men's traditional perks while allowing women to keep their same traditional perks. So in other words, women are still enjoying their traditional perks, but now they're also enjoying man's perks, which leaves men with nothing. And they're also giving women, women have always had this soft power, but now they're giving them traditional power. So they have both soft power and traditional power, which leaves men with no power. Like men don't have any power in society right now, period. They don't have power in their household. They've never really had power over their lives. And that's one thing that feminism has always gotten wrong. The man who goes out and works a hard manual labor job, that's not power. Like that's not power that he has over his life. That's that's power that he loses over his life by going out there and grinding and trying to provide for the family that he loves, where his heart really is. And feminism, that's one thing that feminists actually knew this about men, but I'll get into that in a minute. But moving on from that, so the UN, as part of their 2030 agenda, they have integrated. Let me back up. I want to talk a moment about feminist history. Now, I just touched upon the idea that feminists were aware that men derived a sense of purpose from providing for their family. It's messed up. So feminists traditionally have more or less lied to their women followers and have told women that men wanted to work and didn't want women to work because they wanted women to depend on the man and they wanted to keep them powerless, as if we sit around plotting to do such things. And it's messed up because if you actually read the work of feminist scholars, they knew as far back as the 70s that was not the case. They were aware of the fact that men derive a sense of purpose from being able to provide for the people that they care about. It's their entire center, and really, it's what God designed us for. And feminist scholars, they were aware of this, and they postulated that if men were replaced in every avenue in life, that they would begin to lose a lot of their momentum. They would lose their sense of purpose and a lot of motivation, and thus would allow women an ample opportunity to get ahead. And early on, they started trying to replace men. One of the first things, and this kind of gross, but they promoted the use of dildos, and this was several decades ago. But they promoted women to use that device, just a way of replacing men, and that was one of the first. And as we know, it's progressed and it's gotten a whole lot worse. But kind of moving on from that, so well, not really. Feminism can be looked at as critical gender theory, and all of this stuff is predicated on critical theory. If you don't know what critical theory is, in a nutshell, it deals with analyzing existing power structures and figuring out ways to dismantle them. And feminism is pretty much critical gender theory. It analyzes the nuclear family, or AKA patriarchy, and looks at dismantling it. That's what feminism is more or less centered upon, that and doing away with gender roles. Critical race theory deals with looking at power structures in terms of race. In this case, most people that follow critical race theory, they look at the white majority. And when they say white supremacy, they're actually talking about white majority and white power based, not white power, white power based upon white majority. But, God. All of these, all of these theories have been developed over the course of the past, 50 years for some of them, 30 years for others. And the United Nations, in their 2030 agenda, they're integrating a lot of this stuff into that plan. And that's like their sustainable development goals on justice and inclusion and gender equality. That's what all of that is. But what they're ultimately doing is, in women's case, they're propping women up to be the rulers of men and the keepers of men, just like the Greeks did, while the Greek slave owners did. I've got a list here. That's why I keep looking away. I've got a list of things to cover. So the UN's integrated this, and like I read off of their website, all of these entities and institutions in America are working to advance these goals. One I'm going to focus on in this video is the universities, because a lot of these call to actions. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, you've noticed that women have changed a lot. Well, a lot of this has been part of calls to action that were first set off. They were concocted at the university level, and they were pushed on the social media, where they kind of became a viral sensation. And since then, they've taken on a life of their own, and they've become something different entirely. And it's just a big wave that just keeps going and going and going. And yeah, I mean, a lot of you guys, if you pay attention to women's posts and people's posts on social media, when they're talking about this process of becoming, and they're being light at the end of the tunnel, and don't give up, and things are really hard right now, but it's all going to be worth it in the end. That's what they're actually talking about, is all of this stuff. And from based upon the things you learn in this video, I want you to learn to interpret such content through this lens, to use this lens whenever you see such content, and you'll learn a lot about what's happening. Um, so universities, like I said, they concoct calls to action, and a lot of this coordination at the university level is done in safe spaces. You've all heard of safe spaces, and probably until now you thought it was just a bunch of fruitcakes that were afraid to be confronted with facts that they disagreed with. Well, that's kind of true, but that's not what they were invented for. They were invented so that certain groups of people, certain demographics, could coordinate together on how to dismantle the power of other groups of people without that group of people being aware of it, because they're not allowed into the safe space. And it's women that are working on this, young women, feminists, it's LGBT activists, it's BLM activists. And a lot of this, another big part of their critical theory setup is the concept called intersectionality, which more or less is like a hierarchy for a hierarchy for oppression. In a nutshell, according to intersectionality, like if you're a woman, you're more oppressed than a man, but if you're a black woman, you're more oppressed than a white woman, and if you're a trans black woman, you're more oppressed than a black woman, and et cetera, et cetera. But what it really is kind of like a pyramid setup for different demographics. Whoever's the most oppressed is going to be propped up the most. And on the UN's website, it states that vulnerable populations must be empowered, and they're empowered according to where their status is on the totem pole of intersectionality. So women are being propped up over, like, white women are being propped up over white men, and then like white trans women are being propped up over white women, black women are being propped up over them, and et cetera, et cetera. Moving on from that, another thing that feminism has postulated, and I touched on a second ago, is gender differences being socially learned conditions. It basically states that masculinity is socially learned. Let me grab a sip of water again. And it theorizes that men can learn how to be feminine if they're trained to be, and women can learn how to be masculine if they train themselves to be. And that's, in a nutshell, what's been going on for the past 7 years, is a whole lot of that. And what this ultimately is, like, is gendered Marxism, like critical theory and all that stuff. All it is Marxism. It's just it's the same crap that Karl Marx proposed, where his theories were predicated on like class, based upon like finances. This is based upon identity. But moving on from that, a lot of this stuff has gotten out of hand, and I don't know how many of you guys follow Breitbart or Blaze or Daily Caller, but if you follow any of those, you've probably noticed a lot of articles coming out here lately that detail white women quitting their jobs, teachers, their teaching jobs, and talking about how they don't agree with the things that are going on in schools. And a lot of people are talking about it and they're like, oh, they're teaching critical race theory. Well, it's much worse what's actually going on in the schools. They're trying to program, like, like white students, particularly white boys, and hating themselves. They're trying to instill in their minds all kinds of insecurities. And in certain cases, as was the case of what one of these lady teachers talked about in a video, she said that there were certain teachers that would actually take points away from the grade of white boy students, and would add points to the grade of other people's, or yeah, they would add points to the grade of other students. And the whole idea here is, and I forgot to touch upon this, um, an essential component of what's going on with the focus on critical theory in this country is called equity, and it's not really equity, but the UN refers to it, and everybody who's woke refers to it. But the idea is that men, particularly white men, have held everyone back traditionally and have oppressed everyone, and they've caused people to fall so far behind by holding them back that now men and white men must be artificially held back and barred from certain opportunities in order to let other people get ahead. And when these teachers are taking points off of these students' grades, that's the principle that they're applying. And that's why these women are quitting. Now, moving on from all of that stuff, the UN mentioned that they had to empower vulnerable populations. Well, the biggest way that they've empowered women over the past 7 years is through social media. And as I said before, the universities, they put out these calls to action, and it becomes a viral sensation on social media, and it gets adopted by everybody. Um, Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. Sometime around late 2015, and this has been going on for a little while longer, and I'll touch on that in a second. But sometime around 2015, I'm still not clear on this. I don't know how much propaganda was being pushed out in women's circles. You got to keep in mind, um, let me back up. Women have their own private Facebook groups, and I know this from personal experience, and they've got a lot of them, and they do a lot of coordination in these groups. They got secret Facebook groups that you have to be invited to. And they in the past they've actually had their own private mobile apps. Two of these apps were called She Negotiates and Close the Gap, and they're no longer online, and you can't find them, but you can still find literature on them. And both apps were centered around acting as a hub to allow women to discuss how to better infiltrate the upper echelon of the workforce. And strangely enough, they went dark right after the Me Too movement. But sometime around 2015, there was a collective agreement amongst the young millennial women. They decided that they were no longer going to make themselves vulnerable for men ever, and that they were going to take the power away from the men. They were never going to depend on them again, and that they were going to switch the roles. And there was a lot of propaganda. I don't know how much, but I know that propaganda was being pushed out that helped facilitate this. But they latched on to the notion that gender roles were, or gender was a social construct, and therefore they were going to train men how to be passive, and they themselves were going to train themselves on how to be masculine and be the dominant one. And in a nutshell, women had desire to rule over men. That's what all of this was about. I mean, in a nutshell, that's the overarching theme. It's no more, no less. Um, Moving back a little bit, so this right here that I just talked about happened in 2015, but around 2011, 2010, somewhere in that margin, if you guys, especially millennials, if you remember, there was a thing that happened on social media where it was said to be for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, but where every woman on your Facebook page would share an identical status update, or they would post an identical status update. And like I remember one year, you were scrolling your news feed, and one woman would say, "I like it on the bed," and then you would scroll down, another woman would say, "I like it on the couch," and then you keep scrolling, "I like it on the mantle," "I like it on the chair," and every woman was posting that and saying they liked it on a different object. And the men saw this. They're like, "What the hell are y'all talking about?" And the women wouldn't tell us for an entire day. And then at the end, they finally said it was for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Well, that was a lie. That was actually a large study that was conducted where they were trying to gauge how men would react to being excluded from a wide initiative. And that, in my opinion, as far as I'm aware, was the beginning of this social movement crap on social media. But that was followed shortly after by a study that was conducted by Facebook, where they basically they pinpointed posts where somebody posted something positive, and they increased the visibility of that post or those posts, and thereby increased the interaction with it and the likes. And then they took and focused on posts that were negative, and decrease shadow ban, decrease the visibility of those posts. And what they learned was that the people that were posting negative things, by not getting any likes and by seeing the people that were posting positive things and that were getting likes, they started to post more positive stuff. And they figured out that the people that were posting negative things were influenced by that. So we fast forward a little bit. Like I said, that Facebook study was in 2013. 2015, the women had decided that they were never going to be vulnerable again. They were going to take power away, never depend on a man, and switch the roles. Shortly after that, there was an initiative, a call to action, where women that participated were encouraged to, with any guy that they were talking to talk endlessly about their jobs and to be cold to them, to not give them any affection, and to not give them anything that they want, and to act like they didn't have time for them. And if you millennial guys recall, right around that time in 2015, especially if you're in the dating market, you were talking to women during this time, and they went from behaving a certain way to suddenly being very cold overnight, and they're always talking about their jobs. And you'd be like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And they're just like working, very short. Well, that was part of the call to action, and it was intended to groom men to go ahead and get them prepared for this future world that they were creating, where women would be career women, and they wanted to get men accustomed to not feeling entitled to female affection. And right around that time is where you went from every other Facebook page that a woman had would say that they were a proud stay-at-home mom. Well, that vanished overnight, and that was part of this. Right around this time, and I didn't really. Well, let me back up. So we fast forward a little bit to March of 2016, and there was another call to action. And this one was a little bit worse. Again, it was mass participation, just like all the others. But this time, the women were encouraged to start putting out content that influenced men. And a lot of it was designed to basically kind of break them down and break their minds. And a lot of it's weird psychological crap that almost sounds crazy when you explain it. Like one of the things, women that participated, they were instructed to take a group selfie with all women and for everybody to look directly at the camera, which is called breaking the fourth wall. And it was said to convey a subtle sense that whoever saw the content was being spoken directly to. And they would caption it with something along the lines of, "I'm so glad you're finally letting me go. I'm ready to grow into the woman that I was always meant to be. And I'm excited for all of these opportunities and things that are coming my way in the future." And it doesn't sound like much, but when every woman on your Facebook page, as you're scrolling the newsfeed, is doing it, it has an effect. And that was the whole intent there. And again, it's just more stuff to condition men to feel like they were being excluded from something, that they were unimportant. And from there, the psychological manipulation got a lot worse. And there, a lot of this stuff has occurred on and off of social media. It's all been designed to break men's minds and to condition men to be passive, to make themselves small, to not have confidence, and to really repress their masculine instincts. And that's where that whole toxic masculinity crap comes from. They're trying to train men to be ashamed of their masculinity, and they've kind of changed the course of that over the past couple of years. Now they're like, "Oh, well, there's just certain attributes," but that's not what it was in the beginning. See where we at. So right around that time, that in March of 2016, with that initiative, that's when I first started piecing together. I'm like, there's something going on here. And I remember, just being on a quest, searching for any bit of information I could. When all of that was going on, I asked a lot of people what was happening, and I got gaslit, and I didn't know what it was at the time. But I later found out, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Like I said, around that time, I was searching for answers, and I found a lot of articles that were published by female writers right at that time. And one of them was actually published by BuzzFeed, and all of these were basically warning men of what was coming. And the BuzzFeed article, the woman was writing. She basically she started it off by saying it's very important that men begin to learn that women are not as innocent as men think that they are. And I know that I'm going to get in trouble, or probably going to get in trouble for publishing this, but I want to warn men before what's happening goes too far. And I remember reading that, I didn't know what was going on. I knew something was going on, and it scared the crap out of me. And that article, it went on to detail typical manipulation tactics that women do that are, well understood now, that weren't, strangely enough at that time. A lot's changed since then. One of the manipulation tactics listed in that article was actually crying on command, like saying that women could cry on command and in order to influence men with their tears. And that one didn't really sit well with me. But in the ensuing years, I've actually seen that happen, and that lady was right. But moving on, March 2016, those initiatives were about breaking men's minds. Just a whole lot of crap to condition men to be ashamed of who they are and to make themselves small, and essentially to groom them for the passive role that women were abandoning and were in the process of abandoning. And keep in mind, this entire thing, man, like, intricate planning has went into all of this, and that's the whole reason I'm making this video. I know a lot of you guys know this, like even those of you who haven't been studying this like I have, you know that something's going on and it's not organic. And you're absolutely right. um, Also, during that March 2016 thing, um, women were encouraged to gaslight, and that's what I encountered. But they were actually instructed to gaslight people, which is, if you don't know what gaslighting is, it's somebody says that you did something, you say, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you gaslight them and you try to make them feel crazy for even asking about it. And another one was suppression of the truth. I actually shared a PowerPoint that was made by a feminist that detailed the process of suppressing the truth and online social media security for women that were involved in this stuff. But they were encouraged, like, if men became wise of the things that they were sharing, that they were supposed to delete it, and if men shared any of the stuff, they were supposed to attack them. And this one was particularly dangerous. The whole gaslighting thing. First off, I'd never seen anybody gaslighting until that, and nobody was ready for it. And now it's a commonplace thing, and that's one thing that I want to point out. Another thing, this suppression of truth. Um, if any of you guys have been wondering how come our nation went from us all loving the truth and nobody suppressing the truth to overnight almost half of us wanting to suppress the truth, I believe this is where it started. I believe that this is how the can of worms was opened up as part of these shady social movements. But another thing they were instructed to do was project. So and that entails with accusing your opponent of that which you yourself are guilty of, and it directs suspicion towards them, and it also keeps them wrapped up with trying to disprove your allegations. They waste their energy doing that. So shortly after that, women began sharing content, and this was another call to action. But they began sharing content saying that men and women were evolving, and they would share content trying to groom men for like house chores and things like that. And they would start sharing memes of a man cooking or cleaning, saying that real men do this, and et cetera, et cetera. And around the same time, I stumbled upon some materials that it was basically masculinization training materials for women. And there's a lot of different ways that they've been masculinized over the years. Now, while all this has been going on, they've been encouraged to pursue typically male dominated positions that require male personality attributes. And that process has masculinized them. And it's also been traumatic for them because they are capable of developing those traits, but it doesn't come natural to them, and it traumatizes them, and it really messes up their family life because they don't know how to they forget how to actually be women. But that's not all of it. There's, the instruction manuals that I've seen tell them to walk with assertive posture, to keep their chest poked out, and all that, to talk in a deep voice, and to talk aggressively. There's even things like telling them to, if they're walking with a man like down the sidewalk, to walk a couple of paces ahead of them because it conveys it's supposed to convey some sort of notion that he's second place or some crap. I know it sounds crazy, but nevertheless, it's a thing. Um, and okay, so right around this time, um, all of this transpired with a massive takeover of the workforce, or the workplace. Um, the women began to infiltrate the upper echelon of the workforce. A lot of policies were put in place, and there had already been policies in place, but they really ramped up in certain industries, encouraging women to promote other women and etc. And what developed around this time was a culture of discrimination against men, particularly white men, in a lot of industries, especially female dominated industries or industries that had a lot of women in upper management. They started to develop a culture of discrimination against the men that are their male applicants. And for in a lot of cases, especially for white guys, they wouldn't even consider those guys that or their applications with no repercussions. And at the same time, they would promote women, their fellow women, as quickly as possible and as high as possible, often promoting them far beyond their level of ability. And once they're there, you can't really do anything about it. But this is also, to a certain extent, they've been discouraging men from going to college. And at certain universities, they've actually required men to watch educational videos on how their masculinity is toxic, et cetera, et cetera. But that's been a big part of it, is just the takeover. They're trying to get women, like they're like a culture of harassment towards women who choose to be stay-at-home moms has developed over the past 6 or 7 years. And they're trying to encourage all women to go either work or get an education or both. And they're trying to get them to raise as quickly as possible. And this is predicated, again, this is about dismantling existing power structures. And the idea is, if the woman is the breadwinner, that the man can't call the shots in the marriage or the relationship. And it all boils back to that agreement that they made in late 2015, where they said that they were no more vulnerability, we're going to take power away, never depend on you again, and we're going to switch the roles. um, right around this time is when the Me Too movement happened. We're talking about late 2017 here now. And 2017 was actually a power grab disguised as a reckoning against perverts in high places. And don't get me wrong, there are real perverts in Hollywood. Harvey Weinstein was a pervert. And me personally, I don't think perverts, men or women, have any place in our society, period. But that's not what the true incentive of the movement was. It was a takeover of Hollywood, but it actually, and a lot of you guys, I'm sure you remember this, it translated into a large call of action that became a thing on social media, where all the women that you were friends with were suddenly talking about sharing their experiences about how some dude grabbed their butt in shop class 10 years ago. And again, the effect of that was intended to make men make themselves small, to suppress their instinct, to not go after women, to not pursue women. Just totally trying to tame, break, and subvert men. And I think a lot of people were fortunate enough to see that. If not while the movement was going on, then you definitely saw it during the Kavanaugh trial, where it became very obvious. Fortunately, it didn't really open up a conversation on the matter, I don't think. But while this was going on, I actually remember seeing a post from a lady on my Facebook page where she shared it was a photo of her son laying asleep in his crib, and it was captioned that said, "Son, I love you so much. I don't know what you're going to become in this world, and I don't know what's going to happen to you, but I hope you find peace and I hope you find happiness." And by this point, I already knew what was going on, and man, it just devastated me seeing that. And I just don't understand, like, you mothers who are in that position and you have sons that are growing up in this. Why don't you speak out about it? There are so many men who think like I do, like you don't even know. Most of them don't talk about it because they're afraid of the repercussions and the consequences for saying so. But speak out about this stuff. We have to push back against this. If you know it's wrong in your heart, speak out about it. And I think we all know deep down that this is wrong. I think everybody that's involved in this deep down knows that it's wrong. That's why it's so hard for them. And that's why all of this propaganda keeps coming out, telling them to keep pushing, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. Because if they didn't have that, they would give up on it because they know it's wrong. But moving on, another big part of this has been the invasion of men's spaces and the breaking of men's solidarity. And I think this one's been around for a while. Keep in mind, the feminist movement started back during the 1960s sexual liberation. It's been going on for 50 years. But it's really this invasion of men's spaces has really picked up in earnest these past 7 or 8 years. And virtually every male space has been invaded at this point, even the Boy Scouts. And it's the reason this is happening is because women are well aware. They're aware of the power of solidarity and group strength, which is what they have, and they want to break that up. Again, it's dismantling the nuclear family. It's dismantling patriarchy. It's analyzing an existing power structure and is dismantling it. So they've endeavored to infiltrate all male spaces. At the same time, you'll notice that, like, especially married guys, if you try to go play golf with your coworkers or have a beer after work, your wife will give you endless crap about it. And what I personally believe that is, now, when that happens to you, your wife usually tells you, "Oh, I'm just insecure. I'm sorry." I'll tell you what I think it is, and this is just my theory, but I think that what they really don't want you to do is hang out with guys. You guys can share your experiences, compare notes, and then thereby develop a culture of resistance against the values that they hope for you to have. That's what I think. Could be wrong, but based upon what I've learned these past 7 years, I seriously doubt it. Moving on, I mentioned code speak earlier. So I think this has always been a thing, and I think it's part of women's soft power. Some guys see it, some guys don't. Um, Even the guys that do see it, most of them can't understand it. They know that something's being talked about, but they don't know what it is. There's a few formulas that I've noticed that they use, like one that's really popular is they'll take something that's happening to someone else and they'll impute it to the first person, meaning that, like, instead of saying I gave my husband medicine, it there were side effects that made him sick, they'll say I took medicine, it had side effects that made me sick. So they take what's happening to their husband and they say it's happening to them. But at these universities, keep in mind it's a lot of feminists and LGBT activists, but mainly feminists in these universities that are putting this stuff together. And they've since kind of weaponized this and they developed code terms for women to follow. And the more obvious ones, I'm sure a lot of you know about the dog meme, which is not really a thing anymore because people started finding out about it. But back in 2016 and 2017, there was a lot of sharing of like a woman would take a selfie with her dog and she would put a long caption describing what she was doing with her dog or for her dog or to her dog, and she was actually talking about her boyfriend or her husband, and the dog served as a symbol for the husband, and that was a really big one. And then people started finding out about it, and it just stopped. And now you see them share real dog memes that have nothing to do with it. And I think I almost feel like that's a gesture to cover up for the past. But anyways, You'll notice if you go back on a lot of these chicks' Facebook pages, a lot of those things that they shared during that time are not there. Just like everything else has been scrubbed. But let's see what we got next. Women's code speak. The best way to understand it, and that way, like I said, well, I didn't say this, but when I say code speak, I don't want you guys thinking like military code or anything like that, but like that first person perspective thing. The best way I know how to explain the way they approach this, Keith Richards, in his autobiography, he described, working with the Stones, and he said that working with Mick Jagger was like really difficult, and that everybody didn't like him because he was a real diva. And he said while they were in the studio, they would actually talk crap about him while he was right next to him, and they never knew, or he never knew, because they would refer to him as Brenda. So they, while he was standing right next to him, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, and that bitch Brenda," and they effectively talked crap about him, and he never knew about it. That's more or less the approach that women take when they quote unquote speak their speaking code or speak their second language, as I like to say. Um, but kind of tying into that, this isn't really code speak that I'm going to talk about, but all of these posts, like I've said, these posts that women are sharing, and a lot of people, it's not just women, it's a lot of BLM activists and members of the LGBTQ community. They keep talking about moving towards this higher evolution and growing into something, becoming something, and they're being light at the end of the tunnel and just don't give up and all that. This is what they're talking about. They're talking about this put this move into this new world where the old traditional power structures no longer exist. And that's why, for them, it's scary because it's uncharted territory and everything keeps going wrong. And a lot has gone wrong um, in this process. But if you learn to interpret such content through that lens, you'll learn a lot because that's the narrative. And you're intended to be an outsider, but it's not all that hard to insert yourself into that scenario. Now, moving on, another big manipulation tactic that has been weaponized over the past 7 years or so is sexual coercion. And I'm not going to talk too much about this one in this video. I'll have to make posts about it where I can tailor the language, because if I talk about it in this video, it'll probably get pulled down. But in a nutshell, men, you really need to get your sex drives under control. When women are able to manipulate you through their sexuality and sex in general, that doesn't make you strong. That doesn't make you masculine. That is a vulnerability that you need to get under control. That's your carnal nature. Just as women's carnal desire is to control man, your carnal drive is to be overrun by your sex drive. And it's not good. It's good for you to pursue women. It's good for you to be an active man and pursue the woman and all that jazz. But to be ruled by your sex drive, no, it's not good. It's not wholesome. It's a vulnerability, but it's been exploited and it's been carefully cultivated in the past 7 or 8 years. And women have actually been using sexuality to train their husbands for a number of things. And this is actually an old feminist concept. Making what do they call it, making the personal political or some crap like that. But yeah, so women have been using it to train guys, like, and this usually entails with depriving men of sexuality or intimacy. They regulate how much sex they give to men, and like if they want a man to do something like do the dishes, they'll they'll hint to him that they want him to do that, and then when he does it, they'll reward him with sex, and it reinforces that behavior. And it's essentially a reward-based system, kind of like the same trick that you would use to train a dog, which kind of explains the dog meme thing, in my opinion. But um, kind of moving on for that, or this really ties into it. One of the worst things that they've done. Well, there's two things, and I'm gonna cover both of them. But one of the worst things, in my opinion, that it hasn't set well for me in this process, trying to groom men to be timid and passive. Uh, there's been a call to action, and I've already shared the studies on this, a couple of them. I've got more, but there were studies that were conducted at universities talking about male penetration.
and they one of these studies actually analyzed instances of prison abuse, so to speak, where like a guy drops the soap in the shower, that kind of thing. And they analyzed those incidences and noted the fact that like when it happened to men, it tended to break them down. It tended to make them passive and timid, and really kind of broke down their spirit. And the studies postulated that if a man were to consent to having that happen to him, that it would have the same effect. And some of these studies, like a lot of these studies, if you look into them, you'll notice that it's kind of a joint effort between like half of them are written by gay men and the other half are written by feminists. And one of them is called "Transgressing the Body Boundary and the Heterosexualization of Anal Sex for Male Anal Play." And that term heterosexualization, what that means is taking a queer concept and integrating it into a heterosexual's life.
And a lot of people that promote this stuff, you'll always hear them say, "Oh, it's not gay, no matter which way you cut it." Well, what they're trying to do is they are trying to make straight people gay. From the feminist angle and the women that promote this stuff, they're trying to make men more timid, but the gay community is actually trying to introduce straight men to the gay side. And it actually has had the effect that they have been hoping it will. Well, I'm getting a little too far ahead.
In 2016, December of 2016, there was another call to action where women were encouraged to deprive their significant others of intimacy, as always. And the instructions were to deprive them of intimacy, get them sexually frustrated, then to get them in the mood, possibly get them drunk beforehand, and then present an ultimatum to them. We can do this, we can sleep together, but only if you agree to try something new. At which case, they're going to peg him. And yeah, and that a lot of people participated in this. And for those of you that don't know what pegging is, it involves the male's rear end, a rubber object, and a harness worn by a woman. And that's so those studies, that's how they were made into a call to action in this case. And I was fortunate enough to see this in these Facebook groups that I was in, and I remember warning people like a freaking madman. I was like, "Hey, they're trying to peg you," and everybody thought I was crazy. And here we are, 7 years later, and now it's a commonplace theme in our society. But when I was in those groups, a lot of these guys ended up going for it. Unfortunately enough, and these women had a field day with it. You can tell that the way that they were talking, it had nothing to do with sexual exploration between two consenting partners. It was about the power exchange involved in performing that act. And they even made jokes about these guys, talked about turning them into bitches. And one woman I remember said, even the sound of his voice has gotten softer since I mean, just awful. I mean, seeing that changed my life. It's one of the worst things that I've ever experienced. I mean, I still, like, when I think about it, it makes my freaking blood boil. But I talked to a woman just a couple of nights ago, and we were talking about all of these things. And she's a born again Christian, recently born again Christian. Like myself, I'm a Christian. And she was talking about how she's been on Christian Mingle, and she said a lot of the guys that she's ran into on Christian Mingle, they expect so like she wants to submit to a man, and she wants to be a stay-at-home mom and all that kind of stuff. And she says that the guys that she runs into on Christian Mingle, they're always shocked when they encounter her, because they say that the women on Christian Mingle are always trying to dominate them. And they told her that a lot of times when they're talking to a woman on there, they usually end up offering what they call a prostate massage, or a prostate drain, excuse me. And there, you've got feminists on Christian websites that are targeting Christian men for this, which I never would have thought about it until this lady told me this. But
oh my God, it makes perfect sense. Like, if you know how these people think, then yeah. And it's just, God, like, we live in such an evil world right now. But again, that's one of the reasons why I'm making this video. I'm trying to spread awareness to this, and every guy I know, for the most part, y'all know something's going on. Well, buddy, I know what's going on, and I'm trying to tell you. Next thing, I said I had two really bad things here to talk about. The next one, I don't think this is a widespread thing, but I've heard this from several people. Since all of this stuff has started, you got to keep in mind this is all about taking power away from men and conditioning them to be timid. Well, and naturally, I mean, if you really think about it, what I'm about to tell you about, I mean, it's only natural that something like this would happen under these circumstances. But, and I don't know how else to say this, but there's been women out there that have been giving birth control and hormone blockers and stuff like that to their husbands when they get pissed at them, and sometimes even their sons. And I know a lot of you guys in the manosphere, you've probably seen those cases of those mothers, or actually those fathers. They go to family court and they're trying to get custody of their son, and they say that the mother is putting him on hormone blockers, and basically said that she caught him playing with dolls and therefore concluded that he must want to become a girl. And the father's always arguing that when the son comes over to his house, that the son tells him he doesn't want to become a girl. Well, for some of you people who haven't actually seen that might sound crazy, but on my phone right here, let me pull this up right quick. I have an excerpt from a medical journal. This was published in 2017, and it was in response. This was a group of pediatricians writing in response to a proposal made by the American Academy of Pediatrics. This says, puberty is not a disorder. We vigorously object to the normalization of childhood gender identity disorder promoted by the American Academy of Pediatrics. In the article, Psychological and Medical Care of Gender Nonconforming Youth, published in the December issue of Pediatrics. The recommendations of the authors to reinforce the delusions of gender identity, confuse children, and to prescribe puberty-blocking hormones as though puberty were a disorder are outrageous. This approach violates the oath physicians to take to do no harm, although some affected children and their parents may report being happier when health professionals, families, friends, and schools affirm their false beliefs. Happiness is not always consistent with good health. It can also be short-lived. And it goes on to describe all the side effects that are associated with putting anyone on hormone blockers. But there was a shift that happened right around that time. All of these institutions, again, keep in mind, the United Nations, they state on their website that all of these institutions in America are working towards this stuff. But the American Academy of Pediatrics, they began promoting this stuff around the time that all this social movement started getting out of control. All of this stuff is tying in together. They're ushering in, well, what they're ultimately trying to do is, like the United Nations is trying to collapse this country by weakening the men. And just by destabilizing the social order of our country. They want to make the men and women incompatible with each other, and they ultimately, it has a lot to do with population control. They want to make us infertile, and they're actually they're making a lot of progress towards that, which I'll get to in just a second. But yeah, the hormone blocker thing, there's, as part of this, it's just a natural evolution. You've got women that have really bought into this and they're brainwashed. And if it sounds hard to believe, I don't think it should be. Common everyday citizens worked at the Auschwitz camp. Anybody under certain conditions, anybody can be brainwashed into doing just about anything, and history proves that. And you have women that are giving their sons and their husbands hormone blockers, and they're putting them on hormone replacement therapy in secret and also in the open now under the pretext of transitioning them. But kind of moving on. Well, no. Well, yeah. Let's go ahead and move on from that. Another thing that has been promoted, and this one's going to be kind of tough This one's going to stir up some controversy. Keep in mind, I'm not racist. I don't have any problem with people dating outside their race or anything like that. The first girl that I ever fell in love with was a black girl. But these feminists, again, like under the mindset of, and this is kind of tying into the critical race theory, the white majority rule, which ties into everything else. They're trying to, basically, in these feminist communities, they're encouraging the white women to date outside their race. And it's actually developed into a culture where they peer pressure each other into doing it. And I've had numerous women tell me this, but they're basically being told that if they don't date outside their race at least one time, that there's something wrong with them and that they're racist, and like it's that having such preferences is racist. But any of you guys in the manosphere, there was a selfie that a woman posted several years ago, like 2017. It was a shot of her and her old man, a black dude in bed, and she was hugging up on him. And it said, "Dismantling white supremacy, one baby at a time." If any of you guys have that, please get that to me, because I'd like to kind of include that maybe in the comment section of this video. You want to have something when you're bringing up such a controversial topic as this. But yeah, there's been a push for, white women to date outside their race and have mixed race babies. And again, I don't have any problem with people dating outside their race. I do have a major problem with people dating outside their race expressly for the purpose of enacting a soft genocide. Because if you're doing it for that reason, that's what you're doing. And that's pretty evil. I mean, that's Nazi level stuff right there. If you're doing it for that reason, I got a problem with it. But other than that, you do you. Moving on from that, feminists have also promoted infidelity amongst women. And this is something that a lot of guys are kind of starting to figure out. Infidelity already increased among women when social media was introduced. It made, like, you got to put yourself in a woman's shoes. Like, if you're a guy, you might not get any messages from a woman ever. But if you're a woman, even if you're not an attractive woman, you're going to have dudes sending you messages in your inbox. So it's very easy for a woman to cheat. They don't have to make any kind of special plans or anything like that. They don't have to strategize it. They can get in their inbox, meet up with a dude, boom, do the thing, go back to their house. I mean, all within like an hour, and there'll be no loose ends or anything. And it's just very easy. And that for that reason, it became way more common than it traditionally was. But feminists have taken this a step further, and they're trying to encourage women to be unfaithful, and saying that men have traditionally been unfaithful, which is a lie. Well, I mean, they're saying that men have been the unfaithful ones, when in reality it's been more of an even split. But yeah, they encourage that, and there's kind of an epidemic of that. I know a lot of you guys in the manosphere know about that, and I see that too. And you guys that go to bars, you'll notice all these married women that take ladies' nights out. And I mean, if you're ever paying attention, they leave with a different guy every time they do that. It's really bad. And they're encouraging them to have multiple boyfriends, to like juggle multiple boyfriends at a time. That's another thing. They're also promoting lesbianism. It's just crazy. And that's why you've seen lesbianism increase so dramatically, really in the past 7 years. And in my personal opinion, based upon the research that I've done and just paying attention to people, among my generation, I think probably 75% of the women my age have slept with a girl. But moving on from that, it's not really important. It's kind of petty for me to even talk about that. What I would really like to kind of point out here, and this is what pisses me off. Women have endeavored to make themselves, in this entire process of this power exchange, women have not taken consideration into the fact that they've made themselves over into something that men just aren't attracted to. Kind of like, imagine if you went out on a date with a guy and he acted like a girl and he cried. He started talking about his job and he's like, yeah, I was at work and they just made me feel so bad. And imagine that, after the date, you went out to your car and somebody came and tried to rob you, and he just took off running and left you there. You wouldn't want that guy. You don't want a guy that acts scared like a woman. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is a guy doesn't want a woman that acts like a man. You might as well just date a dude. At least you ain't got to worry about getting manipulated all the time. And women have made themselves over into this without any consideration for how men felt about it. They've done it in secret. They've done it up under men's nose and behind their back. And it's just awful. And to me, that's a crime in and of itself. But to make matters even worse, they've tried to break men's minds, and they've tried to train men into becoming something that they're not, and that they can't be, and that they don't want to be. Like, men can't. They can't afford to be timid. If a man fails in society, society's going to kick him to the gutter. Now, it's just terrible. And not to mention, this has happened to millennial men. And the men my age, we've always been troubled ever since we became adults. We came of age during the Great Recession, and there wasn't a lot of opportunities for us. And not making excuses, but a lot of us had real problems. A lot of us were addicted to drugs, addicted to video games, porn, like just failure to launch. Like, you honestly didn't have to attack these men in order to rule the world. Like, they were already, you could have just worked around them. I mean, it was that freaking simple. But instead, you had to endeavor to break their minds and all of this crap. And it's going to come back to you. Here's the thing: I know a lot of you that have participated in this. You think that not many people have seen you, but more people than you think see you. And the Lord's seen all of this, and you're not guiltless. And I hate to say this, but karma's going to come around for the things that you've done. I mean, this is just awful. But the last thing that I want to kind of close this video out on is that now the conversation has kind of shifted, and women know that they've got their way in this. Like, it's already, the process is more or less over, and now they realize that they have all of these broken men out there that they've broken, and you see them talk about it. I mean, they don't even try to hide it when they talk about it. And when they're talking about healing and masculine healing and all that, they're talking about you. The only reason they know how to heal you so well is because they're the one that enacted the damage. They know how to heal all your little hot buttons because over the years they've been trying to dismantle who you are. But the reason that they're doing this is because they realize that, and the irony of ironies, the men that they've created, they're not attracted to those guys. They've realized that the timid men they've created, they're not attracted to, which, go figure. And they don't feel safe around these guys, and these guys have no interest or even the ability to protect them. So now they're not trying to give men their power back. That's not going to happen. Men are going to have to take their power back. But what they're trying to do is they're basically trying to turn men from neutered lapdogs back into neutered guard dogs, give them just enough masculinity to be able to protect them. But that's what's going on. And like, when you see any of that stuff, just FYI, that's what's going on. But I'm gonna wrap this up here. I plan on doing several more videos in the future. This one was meant to kind of serve as an introductory to a lot of these things. I'm gonna come back and talk about certain parts of this in greater detail, particularly the manipulation tactics and things like that. But a lot of my future videos are actually going to be focused on the critical race theory angle, which is a whole nother thing. But yeah, again, this video is not meant to throw anybody under the bus. I know I'm going to catch a lot of heat for this, more than likely. It is what it is. People have to know about this. It is time for these things to be talked about. And I encourage an open dialogue among everybody, men and women. I think everybody at this point knows that some really bad things have happened, and we just need to talk about them and get them out on the table. But anyways, till next time, have a good night.
All the prophets, they say their prophecies, Isaiah, Jeremiah,